Hi, I'm Dr. Joanna Dodd Massey, President and CEO of JD Massey Associates, otherwise known as JDMA Inc. for short. I like to say that I did not choose a career in communications. Communications chose me. When I was in college, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do for a major. My father had worked in advertising on Madison Avenue. My mother had worked on Wall Street in the finance business. I knew I didn't want to work on Wall Street. I didn't think I had a head for finance. Fast forward many years later, I have an MBA and a graduate certificate from Harvard in corporate finance, so apparently I do have a head for finance, but at 18, I didn't think so. I liked what my dad did. I thought that was really interesting. It was creative. I thought it was something that I could do. But at the school I went to, which was the University of Southern California in LA, the advertising major was through the business school, so I'd have to take the finance. So I took a career that was close to advertising in my mind, which was PR. And I went to the journalism school, which is now the Annenberg School of Communications at USC. And I got a degree in journalism with an emphasis in public relations and started working in communications and have spent 30 years doing that. And along the way, I got a PhD in psychology, I got an MBA. I've definitely branched out and expanded that communications, not just working strictly in PR the whole time, but I definitely would tell you that communications chose me. I did not choose it, at least not intentionally. As someone who has a doctorate in psychology, I believe that business and psychology are completely interwoven. In fact, my attitude towards business is what we're doing is problem, solution, problem, solution. That's what I do all day long. So when I think about the challenges I faced in business, that's actually what excites me. That's what makes work fun. I mean, constantly moving, changing, innovating, guiding the company, guiding the ship, strategically looking at what needs to be done in order to take us on a path that's going to help the brand continue to grow and thrive, but then also deal with the challenges and the crises that come up along the way. So I feel like every day is a challenge that I've faced in my career, and I love that. That's the exciting part. I would say from a personal perspective, the challenges that I've faced some of them have to do with the amount of times I've had to pivot. Because I've gotten downsized 5 times in the course of 12 years because I work in the media industry, and that's an industry that has been in tremendous disruption since the 1990s. It is in a constant state of change because of technology and the way that we consume television, consume film, now the way we watch short videos and where we get it and how we get it. I mean, it's just created a lot of disruption. And on top of that, I take a lot of risks in my career. I have been always ambitious. I like to be on the forefront of change. I've jumped around companies so that I can try new things and do new things. And as a result, I've also been at companies that I've gone somewhere new that hasn't necessarily worked out, or a company's been merged, it's been joint ventured. One time I was at a company that it did a big M&A transaction, and they ended up laying off some of their own executives in order to help get rid of some of the trim the fat, as we say in corporate America. So yeah, I consider myself to be the queen of pivoting. I wanted my career to look like me climbing up a corporate ladder straight from entering comms to going to a chief communications officer, then going to a CEO. That's how I saw my trajectory. I wanted to work at 1-2 companies over the course of my career. That is not at all what happened. I am a CEO, I made that, but my career looks more like a jungle gym, which is, the way Sheryl Sandberg put it in her book. It doesn't look anything like me climbing a corporate ladder, and I'm grateful for that. But as a result of it, for years now, I have called myself the Queen of Pivoting. And that's an actual title. You can check it out on my social media bios. It's on Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn. It's been there for a very long time. And I actually give a talk to organizations and special interest groups called The Queen of Pivoting to help teach people how to pivot in their careers, especially athletes, people in the military, people who have careers where they're going to have to make a shift at some point. And I'm also writing a book about it called The Queen of Pivoting. So stay tuned for that. JDMA is a portfolio company with multiple divisions, but they all have one primary purpose, which is that we use neuroscience as the foundation of everything we do. And I help explain that to people by saying, we know that sports is 90% mental and 10% ability, and business is exactly the same. So at JDMA, we carry out very traditional functions for our clients, such as marketing communications. We do employee training and enrichment and engagement, but we also do business book publishing, but we do it in a non-traditional way because we have this foundation of neuroscience in everything that we do, which means that we use the neuroscience to help management identify their own blind spots and understand their reactions to change and their reactions to stress. And then we use communications tools to influence internal and external stakeholders to drive better outcomes. I love technology. I think technology is great. I'm the kind of person who loves change because I consider myself to be a change agent in business. Having said that, I do think that technology is a double-edged sword when it comes to communications. Frankly, I started at a time, let me back up to when I was a kid. When I was growing up, we had 4 channels on television. Then all of a sudden this cable thing came along and we had 50 channels. Then we had 100, then we had 500. Then the next thing you know, the internet's invented and we're watching TV on the internet. Then we've got YouTube and people are making their own videos, and suddenly instead of having a 30-minute show or a 1-hour show or a 2 or 3 hour movie in a theater, you've got these 2-3 minute videos, and all of that you can watch when you want, where you want, however you want, on whatever device you want. So when I first started in communications, it was, in hindsight, pretty easy. You had magazines and newspapers, radio, television news, TV entertainment programs, TV talk shows. That was basically it. That was your media. And when you, as a communications person, were working with the press, I would pitch a story and we would prepare for the story, and then the story would appear in the newspaper one day or a magazine or on the cover of a magazine, or we'd be on a newscast like 60 Minutes or 2020 or something like that. Today, the news cycle is 24/7, 365. It never stops. Somebody puts something on Twitter or on Instagram and it's in the news instantly. It is constant and nonstop. I think it's incredibly beneficial to society. I think that the amount of information and the way that it flows today has enabled us to change and grow as human beings. I think it's incredibly exciting. I will tell you that as a professional in this area, the pace of work is relentless. It's nonstop. I thrive on that. I absolutely love it. But it's not for everybody. So I can see how that is definitely a double-edged sword. There are certain belief systems that all generations have. I'm a generational expert, and I wrote a book called Culture Shock. And Culture Shock is about the 5 generations that are in the workplace right now. It has a business title, but don't let that fool you. It is a self-help book that anybody can read, because I use a lot of pop culture and entertainment references, and I write in a way that's really entertaining. And I bring that up because I think that a woman who's in her 70s or 70, like my mother who's almost 80, has a very specific idea about what women, how women are and how they are in the workplace and how they are in society because of what was going on when she grew up and the belief systems that she grew up with. My generation has a much more expanded view of women and how they can be and how they are at work, because I grew up in the 80s. A member of Generation Z, who are between the ages of 10 and 23 right now. They were born between 1997 and 2012. They have a completely different view of women in society. So the question about, do women have internalized negative beliefs? Every gender, every ethnicity, every an abled person versus a differently abled person, they all have internalized negative beliefs based on the society they grew up in, the country they grew up in, the era in which they grew up. and it all shifts and evolves, and that's what that's what being a human being is about. And so I think that I have worked with a lot of women who have internalized negative beliefs. Fortunately, as a mentor, because I have a PhD in psychology, I'm able to get in there and to work with them on the stories that they're telling themselves about who they are. I think we see those internalized negative beliefs played out in society. That's part of the blind spot that we have. It's part of unconscious bias, and that goes back to the neuroscience and the main point of my company, JDMA, which is that we teach management teams and employees to spot their own blind spots, to understand this negative internalized bias that we all come by naturally. It's part of our brain chemistry, our brain system, and the way it works. And I believe that I talk about it in my books. I talk about it when I work with corporations as clients. We talk about it in all the projects we do, because I know that telling people about it, informing them about it, doing it in a really simple, easy to understand way makes us all better. And one of my favorite expressions is a rising tide lifts all boats, because as we all become more informed, as we become more educated, as we become more self-aware, then we become better corporate citizens, we become better citizens of the world. I think that workplaces are evolving, but slowly. And ways to make them more inclusive have really come to the forefront in this era of diversity, equity, and inclusion, especially when you consider what happened in the United States in the summer of 2020 with the Black Lives Matter movement. That movement, with George Floyd's death and the subsequent uprising, really brought out the systemic racism that lives in the United States. It's not just systemic racism against ethnicity, but also against gender, about sexual orientation, about people who are abled versus differently abled. The unconscious bias that we deal with lives in our head, and it's how we're brought up, it's how we're trained, it's how we are programmed, and it starts when we're in utero. And I talk a lot in my books. I have 2 books, Culture Shock, and then also Communicating During a Crisis. And in both those books, and frankly in all the books I write now and in the future, I refer to neuroscience. I take a moment in every book to explain how we are programmed, and that we all have a story. I call it the rules of life according to me, that we all have a story about the way things should be and the way they shouldn't be, the way people should act and the way they shouldn't act, the things we like and the things we don't like, and that the rules of life according to me lives in here. It's unconscious, we don't even think about it. It's so innate in us that we staunchly defend it. But the brain has neuroplasticity, which means it can learn, it can change, it can evolve. And so I talk a lot about how to retrain your brain, and I do it in very simple ways. I don't do it in dry scientific ways, and no offense to anyone who's a scientist, but I like to explain it in ways that are with pop culture references and humor that help people understand and really grok it, internalize it. That's what I mean by grok. And just get it so that they can then incorporate in their lives, because when we understand our own blind spots and we understand other people, we can work better together. And as I just said, a rising tide lifts all boats. You know, some people look at the world like it's a pie, and if you take away a piece of the pie, for example, you give a job to a person who's of a different color or a different gender, then you're taking a job away from me, and that makes me worried. That's not it at all. Really. And I'm really trying to get people to see that diversity, gender diversity, ethnic diversity, it's hugely important in corporations. Corporations that don't have a diverse staff make huge mistakes in developing their products and developing their services, and it limits their ability to sell their product and their services. And if you have a diverse staff, you sell more and you bring in more revenue. And when you bring in more revenue, you need more staff. So it's not a pie at all, and it's a fallacy that we look at it that way. So That's one of the things that JDMA, my company, works on a lot when we do our employee training, but also when we do our marketing communications, and definitely it's a big focus of the books that we publish. If you do a Google search on the internet, you will come up with thousands of blog posts about how to be a good leader, books about how to be a good leader, books about what do you need to be a good leader. I think that this question, frankly, how to be a good leader, what skills do you need, is as diverse as everybody on the planet. Because what I consider to be a good leader and what someone else considers to be a good leader can be two completely different things. And in my book, Communicating During a Crisis, the subtitle of that book is How to Influence Others When the Stakes Are High. And one of the things about influencing is that there are three components that you have to have in order to influence people. And believe it or not, it is not about being a good communicator. In order to influence people, i.e. lead, they need to respect you, they need to believe you, and they need to trust that whatever you're saying or doing is leading them to safety. And I know that sounds a little strange, but I want you to keep in mind that from the perspective of neuroscience, the whole system, the brain, it's programmed, well, the brain and the central nervous system, they're programmed, they work together to keep us safe. Their whole job is to keep the organism alive. Not their whole job, but the primary job is to keep the body alive. That's what it does. And procreating, it also does that. Like, it needs to perpetuate the species. Makes sense, right? So anyway, in order for someone to influence, it has to be someone I trust that's taking me someplace that I feel comfortable with, that I'm going to be okay with. So if you look at politics, for example, and if you look at the US president, some people follow Donald Trump. They believe him, they trust him, they respect him. Other people don't. And so then you have the recent election where Joe Biden is now the president-elect, because I'm filming this video in December of 2020. Joe Biden's now the president-elect because there were a lot of people who he influenced, right? Who respected him, who believed him, who trusted him, who respected Kamala Harris, who was his vice president choice. So again, there's not one ability, there's not one leadership skill. It's about your ability to influence and who you and your specific brand, meaning you, the human being as a brand, who you and your specific brand resonate with. And that is as unique as every individual on the planet. During COVID-19, mental health has become a big issue, but I can also tell you that mental health prior to the pandemic was a big source of concern for both millennials and Gen Z. And I talk about this a lot in my book, Culture Shock. And in Culture Shock, I go through all of the generations and I explain them, and I explain how they were raised and the eras they grew up in. And one of the things that happened for millennial and Gen Z is those two generations were raised primarily by Gen X, who were kids in the 80s, and baby boomers, who are, the original hippies. They were the ones that sparked the counterculture movement. The thing about Gen X and the baby boomers, they're both workaholics. They followed the silent generation into the workforce. They became workaholics. They really set the tone for putting work above family and everything else. These are the two generations where women started to enter the workforce en masse, and they felt like they needed to do more and perform more and work harder in order to keep up and get promotions and make more money. So you've got two generations that turned around to their progeny and said to their kids, do as I say, not as I do. Family first, take care of your mental health, make sure to take a mental health day, make sure to, self-care, have good boundaries, all this kind of stuff. So we have two generations for whom mental health is a big issue and a primary thing that they focus on and that they expect from their employers. And in terms of how to take care of your mental health, it's sort of like how to lead. It really depends on the individual. And I can tell you that it's as varied as everybody on the planet. I feel like I've said that a lot. I should probably stop saying that, but it is. It's as varied as every individual on the planet. We are all unique. And certainly there are some things, take a bath, light some candles, read a book, meditate. All great stuff. Take a walk in the park. All great stuff. Go for a hike. But here's what I'll tell you. This is the number one thing you can do. Make a list. What can you do to soothe yourself, to calm yourself down if you have 1 minute? What can you do to soothe and calm yourself down if you have 1 hour? What can you do to soothe and calm yourself down if you have a half a day? And what can you do to soothe and calm yourself down if you can have a full day? Make that list, keep it with you. Put it in your phone, put it on your computer, put it on a sticky in your bathroom, whatever you need to do with it, and pull it out when you need that list so that you can institute those things when you need to calm down. If you are in the office in the middle of the busy day, if you're overwhelmed with work, if you've been working too much, if family commitments are too overwhelming, whatever it is, refer to that list. And I will only make one recommendation on the list. If food, alcohol, sex, shopping, binge watching, television, if those, not necessarily the binge watching, but like food, alcohol, drugs, sex, and shopping, if those types of things are on the list, take them off. Because if you can do that in moderation, it's okay. But if you're the kind of person who does that to excess, those behaviors are actually harmful and they cause more stress. They cause depression, they cause anxiety and suicidality, and they're not going to be helpful in the long run. So even if they bring you an immediate relief, take them off the list for these purposes because that's going to be hurtful and actually compound your stress. Communications during the pandemic have really opened up tremendously and in exciting ways. I mean, certainly we have social media. Certainly we also have text and WhatsApp and other services like that. But now we also have a whole new group of people en masse using Zoom, Teams, Skype. As an example, when the pandemic first hit, a lot of my mom's friends, who have been family friends that I've known my whole life, a lot of my mom's friends were alone and isolated in their homes, and all of them are female and all of them are widowed. And so I put together a weekly Friday night quarantini party for them. And I got them all on Zoom and I taught them all how to use Zoom. And we have been getting together every single week without fail since the middle of March. And it is now almost the end of December. And these women now, not only do they come onto the quarantini party, they have started their own parties and events and networking, and they have become complete Zoom aficionados. So I am very excited about all the technology that exists. I can't even fathom how people went through the 1918 pandemic when there was no technology. Like, what did they do? Thankfully for us, we got to go through this with cell phones, with video conferencing, with all the conveniences that technology offers us these days. So I think that, again, I feel like that I might sound like a broken record, but one of my big things when I'm working with clients at JDMA and also in my books is, you do you, boo. And I don't mean that negatively. I literally mean whatever is organic to you, whatever works best for you, that's what works best. There's no right way, there's no wrong way. It's what works best for you. I was really fortunate in the fall of 2020. I received an award from a local media company as a Power Woman of New York. It was a terrific honor. And when I thought about what am I going to say to this room full of women and all of them who tune in to this virtual ceremony that we did, how do I convey the power of women and the power of their voice? And so I'll share with you what I said when I accepted the award. I shared a story. which is that for my entire career, and I'm talking about from my early 20s to today, for my entire career, whenever I walk into a meeting and the seating assignments aren't prearranged, meaning there isn't like some, president, CEO or whatever who always sits at the head of the table, and the vice presidents who sit around him or her, and then all the rest of us at the end of the table. Whenever I go into a meeting and the seating is not prearranged, I take the seat at the head of the table. And as I got more senior in my career and became a senior vice president, executive vice president, and head of communications, chief communications officer, I wasn't always the most senior person in the room. I'm in a lot of meetings with the chairman of the board, the CEO, the vice chairman, all this type of stuff. But whenever I could, I took a seat at the head of the table. And the reason I did that was because it sends a message. It sends a message that I am important, that what I say is valuable and worth being heard, and that in that meeting, you need to listen to me. And it's a subtle message, it's an unconscious message, but it's an effective one. Men have taken the seat at the head of the table for millennia. There are more women in business sitting at the table, but we need more women sitting at the head of the table, and not just in a figurative sense. We need more women sitting at the head of the table because they're the CEOs and they're the ones running the meeting. So I told everybody, take a seat at the head of the table. It is rightfully your spot. Do it to send a message, but do it also to thank the women who forged the path before us, because there are other women who had to deal with really difficult, challenging things, which we all still deal with to a certain extent, but not in the way they did in the beginning when they first went into the workforce. And then do it for the women who you mentor and who are coming up behind you. So thank you so much for having me. It's been such a pleasure to talk with you today.